Hello, anybody that's checking in. Um, Wanted to start off and say that so far this has been an interesting experience. Looking at the Wheel of Time is a very big part of my entertainment. So I like to read and listen, and now watch the show. And I part of the reason I watched the show is a buddy of mine, and he showed interest in the show first, and now we've kind of discussed if I watch the show, he'll give the book a shot, and that's who's going to be joining me today to kind of touch on like where he's at in the show and in the book, and we're going to pick just a couple of topics, not necessarily at random, but we're going to pick a couple of topics that are interesting to him, and then I'll kind of expand on it if I can. And we're going to try to focus on season one, episode one, but honestly, it'll probably bleed over into episode two of the show because that's where he's at. I believe in the books, he's probably right at the end of episode two, and we've both seen the show all the way in their entirety. But we're gonna just kind of dive in. I'm gonna bring him in right now, and then we can kind of go from there. Are you there?
I'm here, man.
How's it going?
I'm ready.
You
It's
ready?
good. It's good. I'm ready
All right.
to, dude, I am ready to jump into this thing.
Did you have something specific first that you wanted to talk about, or did you want to? I've got a couple
Yeah.
topics here. Let's
s-
let's get into it. Wherever you want to start at is fine with me.
Yeah. So going back, knowing that we were going to do this, I rewatched episode one for a second time. It just the way that the show started off, I thought was really fascinating. Something I didn't really pick up on the first time, being new to the story, never reading any books on this topic or this story. Uh, But when the Aes Sedai were chasing that man through the canyon, I don't know if you quite remember that scene um, off the top of your head, but it started with the Red Aja chasing a man through the canyon. Really intense chase. They get him pinned in the corner. I guess Moraine and Lan were kind of sitting up overhead. I guess they had thought maybe he might be a suspect for the Dragon Reborn. Um, but I think the show starts from his perspective, where it shows him and somebody else riding with him.
Right.
And then once he gets cornered, he takes a look to his right as if to look at the companion that he's been riding with, and he talks to him, and there's no one there. And the Aja look at him and they say, "You're alone." And I think right there that was something I didn't pick up on the first go around, but it was interesting because they always talk about the men that touch the one power, how they go mad, they go crazy. And I think that was a really cool example that I didn't pick up on the first go around. I didn't know if that was anywhere in the books. I know it wasn't touched on when I started in the book, but I thought that was a really cool topic to kind of just get going.
Right. Yeah, I have the transcript up, and that's something that in the opening scene of the show. That's what I understand that you can't have everything from the book in the show, and so I tried to watch it with an open mind, and this is a great way to demonstrate that there's power in this world. There's a magical power that exists, and B, men go mad currently if they touch it. If they try to use the power, they eventually go absolutely crazy. Um, and I thought it was a good way to demonstrate it. You know, he
Yeah.
she says stop, and then the two guys are talking to each other, and they said we can't die like this. You can fight them. Use the power, basically. And then she tells him, she's talking to her other Aes Sedai. The madness already has him, and it's a great intro.
Mm.
There's power. There's some kind of something wrong with the power that the men use, and that's a
Mhm.
good point. And now that you've read the beginning of the book, they kind of introduce that a little. They kind of go about it a little roundabout way with the prologue.
True, very true.
And from what I understand, first-time prologue readers are very confused about what's going on.
Yeah, that left me a bit in shambles reading that.
Yeah, I understand the the whole. You know, you got a guy that's killed all his family, and then some random dude shows up, and then the guy goes somewhere else and blows everything to smithereens. Is not made to be like you're not. I don't think you're supposed to really understand what's going on at the beginning.
No. I did like how they had the Red Aja. I'm blanking on her name right now. She definitely plays a much larger role in the story to come.
Yeah, Leandra.
The blonde-haired Red Aja, Leandra. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I thought it was pretty fitting for her to be in that chase right there, take him down.
It is.
But yeah, it was definitely fascinating now reading the book compared to the way that the episode starts. Um, Seeing some of the stark contrasts, it definitely makes more sense now to me how you had your reservations when you started the show.
Right.
But it's interesting that the path that they're trying to take with that. It was weird to see some of the directions that they took the relationships in to start off. Um, like Egwene and Rand. I feel like they definitely hit the fast forward button on that to spark your interest in the little love affair. In the book, it plays out much slower. Definitely almost a little shyness to it, a little kind of schoolboy romance.
Right. And I think the show writers did that for a couple reasons. One of them is that I don't know if you kind of got a grip on how old these Two Rivers people are, and they are like close to 18 or somewhere in that age range. But in the show, it seems to me like they've been aged up a little bit to make like the physicality of the relationship a little more acceptable so that they can accelerate it, like you said. Like in the books, they're very very immature. They interrupt a lot. They can't hold their thoughts to themselves. In the show, they're not saying nearly as much as they do in the book. I don't know if you noticed that at all, but in the
Definitely.
books in the books some of these characters are pretty annoying at first.
Yeah. No, I definitely noticed that they hit the maturation process on these characters from the get-go, especially with Perrin being married. Um, in a topic that we were talking about earlier, you know, having a wife clutches his wife's stomach as if to hint that she's pregnant at the time. Um, you know, and then Ran and Egwene having their moment in the end. The parents kind of leave them to wash the dishes, and we all kind of know what happens next. A little pillow talk.
Right.
And so that was definitely a big difference from the way the book plays out. Because yeah, you just get this vibe to speak that they're just kids, really coming of age, like you said, in the book process, and then they get caught up in this whirlwind of a story, and it looks like over the book they're hit in the face with life, and they've got to grow up pretty fast. But in the book, it looks like they kind of skipped, fast forward a couple years in that process. But I'm interested to see what are some of the topics you had that you wanted to hit right off the start for episode one.
So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I kind of wanted to start small, is the weather. And it seems like such a weird thing to talk about, but the weather in the show.
Hmm.
So the weather in the book, the weather is a major plot point, and I haven't I haven't gone back and rewatched the entire show yet, so I'm not quite there yet. I'm not too worried about it. But in this book, The Eye of the World, the weather is a major plot point. It's in fact, I mean, it's a plot point pretty much all the way to the end. The powers that be on the sides of evil like to mess with the world as a whole, and the best way to do that, in the way that he can, is to screw around with the weather. So, like right now, in the book and in the show, you pointed out that they're wearing like coats, and it looks cold, and
Hmm.
that's accurate. It's like in the book they're talking about how the cold has lasted longer than usual. Spring should already be here. Nynaeve has already uh, been frustrated and beyond about not being able to predict the weather the way she normally can. And I don't know how much you remember of the weather being a topic in the show, like either verbally or visually.
Yeah, so I definitely feel like they started in a similar kind of setting to the show, maybe not one for one, but I definitely got the vibe that it was some point in maybe spring or early spring, late fall. Um, yeah, they almost have it to where it's like fall. Uh, but compared to the book, that's much different because they're talking about snow still being on the ground. Like you said, they're coming out of that really cold time. Um, so I do see the difference there. I haven't really seen it be an important topic in the book or the show yet for me. I'm at chapter 20 right now, and I wouldn't say that it's been a topic of conversation to come up yet, other than the author using it to just really set the scene.
Okay, it's just a visual thing right now. There's snow on the ground, or
Yeah.
the crops are a little late, or whatever.
Hmm.
It's not. Yeah, it gets a little more important as we go along, and I just was trying to. My memory is already fuzzy of the show, but what I remember watching, I don't remember the weather being like a major topic.
No.
And in the first book, and in a couple books later, it becomes an issue again. Like I said, they kind of, the evil powers that be, they kind of like to screw around with as much of the population as they can. If you got bad weather, you can't have crops. If you can't have crops, you don't have food, and it impacts a lot of people, and that's kind of the idea. So I just
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't. Sorry, go ahead.
no, you're fine. That was kind of my thing. Like if you can't grow, they talk about it a lot. If you can't grow crops and your animals are dying because it's really hot or really cold, becomes a problem.
No, absolutely. And you can see that impact in the show. I have seen that the people of the Two Rivers, at least, are impacted by the bad winter that they just went through. I don't think they specifically came out and said that, but they were saying that the crop yields were struggling, uh, and times were getting really hard. I think that was addressed again. I think in episode 2 in the show, and we can get to that when we talk about that. But I have noticed that plot point.
Okay. Okay. So as far as like episode one goes, I kind of wanted to circle back to, you've seen the show in its entirety up to this point, so you kind of like self spoiler there, but I wanted to talk about uh, Padan Fane. He doesn't really. He has kind of like an interesting character arc, and I don't know if you have anything to say about it because he's
Yes.
briefly introduced in the show, and then he's talked about, I think, a couple times. He shows up in episode one, or chapter 1 through 10 in the book. He does show up again in chapter 10 through chapter 19, and I don't remember seeing him in episode 2. I don't remember seeing him, but he might have been there.
So I'm glad that you brought this up because this was the topic I was excited to talk about. Um, with Patton Fane, it was really cool to see the way that they just drop him in the background, and in his mischievous ways, man, it's interesting to see. So I do know in episode 1 he comes into the town, has
Hmm.
his little trinkets, kind of opens up with him and Matt talking. Matt's selling I guess a bracelet that he had just maybe stolen. That's kind of the impression that you get,
Right.
or he cons somebody out of it, and you see Patton Fane work Matt in this deal, and you could see Patton Fane his charm. You could see that there's a relationship that's been kind of developed in the Two Rivers, so you know that he's been coming around. He knows these people decently well. Uh, but definitely watching the show through its entirety so far and then going back to see it again, it was really cool to see just how they put that in the beginning and set the stage for him and his mischief that he causes. Uh, I thought that that was really interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought the show writers did a really good job of, so he pulls up in the wagon and the kids are, they
Yep.
notice that he's there and he's got a big smile on his face. And, they're like asking him for basically candy and he's like, no, 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 being kind of playful with the kids. And then you get the contrast, right? When Matt walks up, now he's almost like a fence for thieves, like can I sell this here? Well, now I know you stole it, so I'm not going to give you as much. He knows his craft.
Yes, that crooked Patton Fane smile, which I think the actor that they got for him is perfect. He plays that character really well.
He does for what they want in the show. I think they did a really good job casting him. He's got that great smile, that great kind of like cheeky, I know something you don't know look to him, and it's pretty nice to see. The
I agree.
My secondary question is you've also read the book up to this point. So what do you think about Pot and Fane in the book? Because it's not quite so. I don't think it's quite so on the nose. In the show, you've got he shows up and then he immediately shows his like something
Two
more
faces.
dishonest. Yeah, his two faces, and then during the Trolloc attack, there's a scene where it
Yeah.
cuts to Pot and Fane where he's kind of like, haha, look what I did. And then he walks behind the wagon. You don't really know that it was him, but nobody's attacking him. And he kind of like has a cheeky grin on his face while he turns around and walks off casually in the middle of an attack.
Yeah. So show compared to the book, yeah, it is. You definitely don't pick up on those cues. Uh, that's one reason I really like digesting content through shows is you get to pick up on those visual cues that you don't really get in a book. Um, and I thought that that was really cool to see. Definitely knowing how his arc plays out in the future, and you really just get the whole sum from what I've seen in 2 seasons of Patton Fane and his 4 minutes of screen time in episode 1. You see his two faces, the crooked smile, him working Matt, uh,
Right.
which comes into play much later. Again, him and Matt seem to have a little relationship that goes back and forth. But in the book, yeah, I didn't get that vibe. He came in, the kids seem to be drawn to him almost like Gandalf when he comes to town and
That's,
he's got his fireworks to pop. Uh,
that's a
but
fair
he's the evil
comparison.
Gandalf, you know. Yeah.
That's a fair comparison.
And
So
so
go ahead.
yeah, so just from what I've seen in the book, you didn't really get that at the start, but leading up to I think it's around chapter 10, they meet him again, and where is it? the town to the north that they stop at first? Borndale?
It's I can tell you.
Let's see.
Watch Hill.
Yeah, map right.
Yeah, it's Watch Hill.
No, Bear Lawn. Isn't it? Is it Watch Hill where they go stay at the inn?
So
Okay.
they stop and Watch Hill, but I think you're right. They don't meet Pot and Fane again until they get to Barrelon because that's where the White Cloaks are. The White
Yes.
Cloaks and Min Farshaw and Pot and Fane are all in Barrelon.
And so I feel like in the book that's where you kind of get those cues that you get in episode 1, because episode 1 covers essentially the first 10 chapters.
Right.
Um, and so you get those cues right off the bat, all in the Two Rivers with Pat and Fane through that. And in the book, you don't get those cues until they go to Barrelon and Rand sees them and he's talking about how they're staying at the inn. He should come back for some supper or meal. Keeps trying to get Pat and Fane to come back, and Pat and Fane's trying to get information out of him. Who are you with? What are you doing? Where are you going?
Right.
Um, and when he finds out that he's with Moraine, kind of loses it a little bit. And definitely doesn't want Rand to let her know that he is in the town.
Right.
So that's
Let's
kind of
just
where
keep
in the
it
book,
between us.
yeah. So that's where I started picking up on those vibes in the book. They kind of matched the show. But yeah, it was interesting to see the difference there. It is weird to read the book and have so much happen that they just don't include in the show. It's insane to see them cover 10 chapters in like 50 minutes.
Right. It's a it's a challenge. I mean, I think you and I talked about this a long time ago, but we could literally, I mean, if we had the time and the production power and the money and the cast never aged, they could probably make it one for one, but it would take forever. Like this show would last a really long time.
It would be a lifelong project, man.
Right.
It
So
really would.
that's one of the things that I've been interested in on the rewatch is what the producers want to do and where they want to take the show.
Mhm.
And but I'm just kind of I'm looking at that, and I'll probably talk about that on Sunday. Uh, for now, I did want to ask you uh, two more specific questions. What do you think about show Matt versus book Matt Cawthon?
That's a good question. Uh, so before I read the book and before I even got to chapter or season 2, I was not a fan of Matt. I didn't like him. I didn't like the way they portrayed him. Uh, he just seemed to be like a snake. You know, like his friends could see him. His friends could see him for the little good that he had in him.
Right?
I feel like they portrayed him really bad.
They
You know,
they
kind of a thief,
they did.
a snake. But he did have some redeeming qualities, like during the Trolloc attack. You know, his parents are consumed in their own madness, and they lost his sisters, and so he goes out after saving himself to go back out and face the Trollocs to save his sisters and get them to safety. Uh, that did stand out to me, so not all hope was lost for him. But just throughout season 1, I wasn't the biggest fan, especially once he got to the dagger, which we'll talk about later.
Hmm.
Um, I think once he got to that point, I was kind of out on Matt as a character. I thought he was going to be the bad egg of the bunch. I felt like that's the way that they were kind of showing it. Like he's the friend in the group that's going to turn on everyone and go to the dark side. But after season 2, I feel like some opinions have changed. And reading the book, I felt like they portray him differently in that they don't show him to be a sly person. He definitely has those qualities, but that's not him as a person. That's not his whole personality. Which in the show, I feel like that's kind of what you get. Um, yeah, I like the book Matt better than the show Matt. To sum it up.
That's a lot of people that read the book often pick Matt as a favorite. Like they'll pick Matt Cawthon as a favorite character overall. He's got a great arc. He, a lot of people will describe him as like a rascal. Like, oh Matt,
Yeah.
you you rascal. That kind of mentality towards him. They don't really take him serious. If something, if something happens, it's probably his fault. And and I personally don't like what they did with him in the show. Um, but that being said, they had to do something. It's hard to create that kind of it's hard to write that kind of personality into a show if you're not used to seeing it. I mean, he's basically like walking chaos for a majority of the book,
Yeah, that's a
and
perfect way to sum them up.
and that's
Walking
hard.
chaos.
That's hard to write. I mean, how do you write that? I mean, you're gonna have this 20-something-year-old actor walk off screen and capture a badger and release it into town. They could probably do something like that, but now he's just a jerk. I mean, I think so. My personal opinion of what they did with Matt's character at the beginning of the show is that they had to show that he was greedy first over anything else. And
Yeah.
they show that with the gambling. They show that with him stealing from Danya or whatever her name is, and and they do show that the reason he's stealing and trying to gamble is to buy lanterns for his sisters. But he's still stealing. So greed overall, greed over everything else,
Yeah.
and they had to demonstrate that greed because they didn't include the character Mordith in the show when you get to the dark city of Shadar Logoth. So I think they had to try to figure out a way as a show writer, how do you justify Matt walking around finding a dagger and justifying him just taking it? Well, you,
Yeah.
you make you make him greedy, and anything valuable that catches his eye, he's going to want to take.
I agree with that. I think in season one they definitely built him to be not a villain, but to have those non-redeeming qualities of greed. Um, and then whenever he touches the dagger, it kind of turns him into something he's not a little bit, or maybe it just feeds into those dark sides of him. Um, and then
Right.
I feel like in season two they do a really nice job of showing a little bit more book Matt. Uh, but I agree with you. The way they started it, after reading the book, I'm a bit disappointed with the way that happened. But I think that you make a really great point with Mordeth not being in the show, which I think kind of makes sense because if you were to jump into episode two of the show and see this man blow up in a balloon, fill a room up, it would be a little weird to see um, without them really introducing a whole lot of the way the world works, the magic, um, all the creations.
Yeah. I I mean everything about the book is difficult to put into the show. Uh, I mean I think that's a given, and I think a lot of people that go into the show from a book reader's perspective is probably going to understand that to a point. But when you like, there is some expectation. Like somebody somewhere in a room decided to butcher Matt's character. Did they did they not understand how important people consider his character arc? And is it redeemable? Do they have a plan? And I think they kind of do. Like you said, they're kind of turning him back around in season two, and I think that's a good thing. I like the contrast of looking at the show character versus the book character, just to kind of get a feel for like, do they have the bones of the character in the show? Because I think that's important. And
Yeah.
I don't want to like nitpick every little thing, but I do like to notice them even if I'm not necessarily complaining about it. So like just as a quick example, and I don't expect anybody to really really pick up on things like this, but like for example, when you watch the show, when you watch the show, um, Moraine, when they're discussing Shadar Logoth, uh, Moraine is the one that says, there's a place we could go. I believe. Let me make sure I don't have that backwards because I've gotten it backwards a couple times so far. Uh, I'm gonna get it backwards, but camping for the night. It's in my notes here. This is something I wanted to touch on. But basically what happens is Moraine and Lan are having a conversation, and it's a very very short conversation. And what happens is they're discussing the option of Shadar Logoth. And in one version, Moraine is the one that brings it up, and Lan immediately shuts it down. And in the other version, it's the opposite. Lan is the one that brings it up, and Moraine is immediately like, "No, we're not going there." And I believe it's they're forced to go there in the show because of her wound. She gets worn out, and she gets a wound,
Mhm.
and then they have to go there. And I believe in the book, she doesn't have a wound, but she's very weak. But Moraine does not want to go there at all. She doesn't want to be anywhere near that place. And so that's the kind of, I really should have had that written out better, because it's a very very minor thing, but I feel like the way they wrote Moraine in the show has some pretty strong differences, and the way they wrote Lan in the show has some pretty big differences. And I just wanted to, point out that some of that stuff is some of that stuff is minor, but it's somebody is going to catch it, and I just don't understand why they made the change, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't think I would have the answer to why they made that change, but I have noticed the differences that you've said. Um, and that's kind of the part of the book where I'm at actually today that I got. Um, but a relationship that I thought was really interesting is Nynaeve and Moraine,
Mm,
and them two kind of butting heads at the start of this journey that they're on. Especially whenever they were in Borndale or Baerlon. When
Barrelon.
they were in Baerlon, and Nynaeve was coming back to take the kids or the group with her. She wanted to get them away from Moraine, and Nynaeve is this headstrong character that doesn't fully think all her actions through. Um, I think she just kind of has the confidence and the cockiness that she thinks that she knows what's best for everybody, and that they need to do her plan without really realizing the implications of what she's going to get everybody into. And it was kind of interesting to see her go back and forth with Moraine there in Baerlon, and then again, and it's Shadow Morgoth, Morloth.
Shadar Logoth.
Okay, man,
Yeah,
these names they're a
yeah.
mouthful.
They are. They
But
are.
yeah, whenever Moraine was saying that she needs to rest, and I think Nynaeve saw that as an opportunity to jump in and show she's got some worth. This is kind of her moment to shine, as she gets to save Moraine. And her and Lan are kind of going back and forth. I know Lan was kind of a little hesitant at letting her jump in to help Moraine,
Right.
and Moraine, she was like, "Chill out, Lan. She she doesn't know what she doesn't know, but let her help." You know. And
Right.
I think Nynaeve kind of took that as a little shot to the ego, and she has her little comeback, and she says it to Lan, but she really is talking to Moraine, which I thought was funny. Um, but their relationship in the book, I don't feel like I really got that in the show, and I've seen a little bit more, I guess, butting of heads. Not really butting of heads, but definitely Lan trying to involve himself in Moraine's plans and second guess her in the book, I feel, than I have in the show.
Yes.
Where at least at the start of the show, Lan to me really seems like a badass manservant and just kind of walks in all stoic whenever he walks into the Two Rivers, hoods over his head, little Aragorn moment.
Yeah.
And all eyes are focused on him, and he pops back the hood and he's like, this is Moraine. This is the real stage, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
um so yeah, I have a little bit of differences from the book to the show, at least on that. But those were just some points that I feel like I took away, was Nynaeve and Moraine and Lan.
Right. There that little triangle of relationship is is non-existent until you get to episode 3, because Nynaeve wasn't even there. Like all the things that you're talking about in Barelon and trying to get to Shadar Logoth, everybody thinks Nynaeve is dead in the show. She she doesn't show up until episode 3.
It gets dragged out by her braid.
Right. Right. So you don't even get to see any of this chemistry, and I feel like this chemistry between the three of them, like how they interact with each other, is important. I don't know what they could have done different. I don't know why they chose to drag Nynaeve out of the village the way they did in episode 1. I'm sure they had some sort of reasoning behind it. I just don't understand it, and I've been
Mhm.
trying to piece that together. Um, and I did find my spot in the book. So I thought it was funny in the show. I said that Moraine wants to go to Shadar Logoth, and Lan says no. And then in the book, it's the opposite. Lan says there's a place the Trollocs will not go, and Moraine immediately is like, nope, we're not doing that. And I I don't understand why I knew that. I was 100% certain that it was backwards, but I couldn't remember why. And it's literally 2 paragraphs in this gigantic book. Um,
It's amazing. That's
I
amazing that you remember that.
I it was just the feeling when I was watching the episode and I was like, isn't that backwards? That isn't it the other way around? Moraine is like Lan is way more willing to risk certain things because he he has a very high confidence in what Moraine can do. And since you've read that part, I mean, you know that Moraine ends up resting, and Nynaeve gets to give her tea to let her rest for an hour and recover, and then she sets wards around the building. But in the show, she's wounded. They they don't get that protection, and I just thought that whole scene like played out very different. Like they kind of got the bones of it, but I feel like I would like an explanation about why they deviated, and it gets more drastic the further we get into the show and continue to read the books. That gap is going to open up really wide, and a great segue to demonstrate that is one of my favorite characters in all of the book series that doesn't exist in the show is Tom Maryland.
What a stud.
What do you
What
think
a
about
stud.
Tom and the book?
Uh, I'm heartbroken that he's not in the show. Tom, he's great, man. I mean, like, I feel like he's the grounding of the group. I feel like everybody can, in a way, take themselves a bit too serious, and Tom is a nice way to just cheer everybody up. Throw a tune on, sit by the fire, sip your tea, and then whenever the boys get their talking to from Moraine or Nynaeve, he gives them a look, gives them a nod, you know, brush it off, move on with yourself, you'll be okay. I really like his character. I think he's a great way in the story to info dump. I know that's a point that you brought up to me before,
Right.
uh, which I've been noticing, but I'm really bummed out that he's not more involved in the show. Uh, so far, I've loved his character.
Right. I feel like this is the I don't know if it's the biggest, but I think it's up on the top of the list of one of the biggest, I think, production mistakes that the show could have made is leaving Tom out of the, like, I know that you get kind of like character fatigue, like, what are all these people? Why are there so many of them? You got four main characters, and now we're adding another one, and then there's Moraine and Lan, and, four people are supposed to be the Dragon Reborn, and now who's this guy with white hair and long mustaches? And
Yeah,
why is he always singing? But I felt like I feel like not having him in the show is is a problem because what they're doing to make up for that is they're having other authoritative figures say what he was going to say. And
yeah,
it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right from like I was talking before about the bones of the character. If you have Moraine uh, tell stories. That's not Moraine at her core. She doesn't typically tell stories unless it's something that drives her goal. She has a goal and she's trying to achieve it. She's not there to answer questions. She's just trying to achieve her goal. But Tom is an entertainer. He's a glee man, and he's a great source of information. Whether you believe it or not, it doesn't matter. He's a great source of information.
yeah, absolutely. I think that, like you, that was a big missed opportunity, and that shows like The Witcher, they have their bard, and
Right.
he's played by a terrific actor, but he brings that comedic element to the group, which I
Hmm.
do feel like The Wheel of Time doesn't have compared to a show like The Witcher. Which isn't a bad thing. Doesn't mean that they have to have that, but that is an opportunity that they did have that they decided to take out. But a point that you made about there being character fatigue, before I read the books and really watched the season, when I got started with Wheel of Time, I felt character fatigue. I had no idea what was going on.
Right.
I was like, who are all these kids? Are they all the main character? Is it Ran? I kind of find it hard to follow where this story's going, who's important, who's not. Like you said, then there's Moraine and Land, and then if you had, yeah, Tom in there, Tam, playing a big part, I feel like that kind of muddles everything. Um, and it was hard watching season one to really get into it, which is why I appreciated it better a second time getting to go through, because I've already seen a lot of these arcs, where they going, who's involved, who's important. But if you're just starting this show from scratch, you in the first couple episodes, your head is spinning with this story because it is a lot to digest all at once.
It's true. It's true. I mean, I like from a show's perspective. Like if I were to try to rewrite episode one, I mean, I probably would have saved the intro, like what we saw in the intro with Leandrin chasing down a male channeler. I may have substituted that for a scene of the boys causing mischief in the town, so that that there's even if they don't say names or you just see them, stealing a pie together or something, then you would at least know that it's still character fatigue, but if you group them together, it doesn't feel so bad. It doesn't feel so daunting. Like you already see that those three boys have chemistry, And then, if you show uh, when you cut to the inn, if they had showed Tom Maryland, if they had put him in the show inside the Wine Spring Inn performing, you would know that the character exists, and you don't need to know his name. You just need to know that he's there. And
Yeah.
they could have, they substituted a lot of things for to include the relationship between Rand and Egwene, and they showed like the braiding ceremony of Egwene's hair, and they showed the relationship between Perrin and Layla. If they had substituted all that to show more more chemistry between the characters and kind of where they fit into the world, I felt like that would have, it may not have cured character fatigue. It's gonna happen, but it may have like lightened the load a little bit. Like, does that make sense? Like, you group the boys together causing mischief, they're together.
No, absolutely. I think that that's a great way to do it, and I think the another great show did it very similar. Game of Thrones.
Right.
That is a show that has a ton of characters, and at times you could get character fatigue, but they I feel like better than anybody else I've seen taken 20 plus characters, muddled it all up, and you can't really tell who's the main character and who isn't, but it doesn't really matter because you're interested in everybody. And over time you learn their place and the relations where they fit in the world. Um, and I think that a suggestion like you made would have kind of helped ease people into that as a viewer.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it was a bit overwhelming in the beginning, and I do feel that when I watched season one, I wasn't as sold on this story as I was at the end of season two. My opinions changed a lot after season two. Season one was great. I feel like cinematically it was done great, but I had a lot of questions. I don't feel like I had any concrete answers. I don't feel like they did a good job conveying things to me in terms of the plot, the arcs that were to come. Um, I had no idea like who's the dragon, what is the dragon?
Yeah.
Is it all four of them? Is it one person? I'm confused. Is who's the evil people that he's fighting? He's fighting them in dreams. He's not.
Right.
It just left you with a lot of questions. Um, so yeah, I do feel like it was a bit of a rocky start, but
I I
there's a
would
lot of things that went unnoticed and
I would like to
unappreciated in the beginning.
I would like to talk about that too, because even in the book, this is a confusing first book. There is a lot of stuff being thrown at you. Uh, you should have you've read up to that point, so you already know that the boys are getting dreams. They got their first dreams in Barrelon, and you're like, what is going on? Is that real? And then you find out that all the rats had their backs broken inside the inn, and you're like, okay, now I really don't know what's going on.
Yes.
And you know, I the I think that the challenge for the show writers for season one is that the book is convoluted. There's so much happening that unless you have the background information, you don't really understand what the big picture is, and you don't get the big picture until you read further on, and then some of the pieces kind of click together. Like, oh, that, and I think that's intentional by the author. The author writes a lot of this from individual characters' points of view, and those people have no idea what's going on. Could you imagine you live in a small town, your only source of news is a guy who brings stuff from out of town like twice a year? I mean, you have no idea how the real world works. I think they talk
Yeah.
about it in the book where they go to they go to Watch Hill and Tarn Ferry, and then when they get to Barrelon, they're like, "Ooh, a real city," and Tom laughs at them, like, "You guys kidding me? Real
Yeah.
city?" And I think that's hard to convey in a show. But just kind of circling back to what I was saying, and to touch on what you said about Game of Thrones, because you made a good point and it was kind of a compliment to what I was trying to get across, is one of the things that Game of Thrones has over the Wheel of Time is houses. Even if you don't know the individual characters' names in Game of Thrones, they're part of somebody's house. And you can always default to, well, that's a Stark or that's a Lannister or whatever. You don't necessarily, it kind of groups them all together into one pot. And you don't necessarily need to know everybody. You just need to know what house they're a part of. And that's missing from the Wheel of Time, which is why I wanted to say that, Matt, Perrin, and Rand are together, Moraine and Lan are together, and then you have Tom Maryland and, you know, the 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 Dark Friends and the Shadow Spawn. And that kind of, to me, it helps lessen the character fatigue, is to try to
It
keep them in
does.
a group.
And I know a point that you pointed out to me when I started this series, because I know starting this series can be pretty daunting for somebody. 14 books, that's a ton to get into. Uh, but you made a really good point when I started, and you were saying you're reading from the perspective of these boys that are out in the Two Rivers. They don't know much of the world. Like you said, their only source of news is from some man that comes twice a year that sells little trinkets, or a Glee man that comes through, their Gandalf visit, and that's all they know, other than what they're taught by the farmers that raise them.
Right.
And part of them even forget their own history. I remember at one point Moraine reminds them, remember who you are and the people that are your ancestors. Uh, but you're learning this story from their perspective. You're learning the world through their eyes. They don't know these things. Rand and the boys, Egwene and Nynaeve, as headstrong as some of them might be, and crafty as others, but they still don't know what they don't know. And like you as the reader, you're sitting right there in their shoes. You don't know what you don't know, and it's a lot thrown at you, which is the same for them. Their heads are spinning. They don't know what's going on. And you really get that reading the book, how confused and tossed about they are along this journey, getting dragged from city to city, attacked left and right. It's a lot thrown at your way to digest all that.
It is, and it's hard to make that come across in the show. I You know, I like both series. They both have good, strong qualities. I can't tell you how excited I was to see these characters come to life. I think that the casting has been excellent so far. I know some people are complaining about season one Matt versus season two Matt, but I think overall, like,
What team are you?
I don't have a Matt. The Matt in the show is not the Matt in the book, so it's kind of hard for me to like what. They're both my least favorite. I like Book Matt.
At least fair.
book
That's
book
fair.
book
I
Matt
do agree
supremacy.
with you. Book Matt is better.
Book Matt supremacy.
That's fair. Season two Matt is my favorite by far, but the little bit that I've got to see from Matt in the book, he's a stud. I like the guy.
Yeah,
He's somebody I'd go sit at an inn and roll some dice with.
yeah, and you'd lose.
Yeah, probably lose more than just the game.
Well,
But
we've been going for an hour. Unless you got something that's really tickling you that you want to talk about right now, I say we just go ahead and halt it here and maybe try to. We were a little all over the place, which I think is pretty normal. This was kind of like a first time thing. I would like to get a little more structured, but I thought we'd get like some general opinions out there first and just kind of bounce around. I think we're probably going to do that one or two more times if you feel comfortable continuing this conversation where we just kind of bounce around and talk about what's on our mind, and then I think if you're interested in continuing, we can try to get a little more structured and kind of attack this series in a little more structured way. As you get further along in the book and I get further along in my analysis of the show versus the book, I'd like to kind of circle back and talk about some things like the Aes Sedai in general, things like the Black Aja and the politics of the White Cloaks that's a big thing in the book, and just kind of some of the factions, the Shan Chan and things like that. But for now, I think a couple more episodes like this where we can just kind of bounce off each other and just kind of go wherever the topic takes us.
Yeah.
Uh, what do you think about that?
No, that sounds great. I think that a thing that I would like to touch on too is the perspectives you get from the book versus the show. Like in chapter one, the book really follows Rand during the Trolloc attacks, and you follow him and Tam in the forest and him trying to get back to the city, and you really see it all through Rand's eyes. But versus the show, you're getting to witness the town just get raged, just get plundered. Um, and I thought that that was really interesting that the show decided to show that versus following Rand through the forest and really with his father. I mean, you still got both, but I think that a topic that would be good to hit is the perspective that the show is trying to get you to see versus where the book is taking you in the story.
I think that should be. I think the next time we talk, that should be our number one. Like we'll just jump straight into that because that's an excellent point.
Sweet.
Let's see, what should we call that? We should call that show POV or something like that, and we can just dive right into that right off the rip. Um,
Sounds great, man.
so for anybody that watches this back on Twitch and makes it all the way to the end, or watches it on YouTube, I will be having like a spoiler, like a very large spoiler episode coming up after I'm done with the show, and I will be available to talk about all of the show. I'm trying to avoid show spoilers while I'm going through the show, and I'm trying to avoid major book spoilers after book two, until I get done with my show versus book comparison. So I'm making some references to things that happen down the road, just as kind of like an anchor point in the conversation. But once I get done with the show, I will be diving into the books by themselves to kind of try to tie some theories that I have together. And at that point, I'll be completely all spoilers, probably at least once a week. So, all right, man. Well, thanks for joining me. I think I'm gonna cut it out here, and I'm glad we got to talk. We do a lot of this conversation on the phone, and it's good to put it out there for somebody that may be interested in listening.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that it's only going to get better from here. I mean, start of the journey. There's a lot ahead of us, a lot to get into, so I'm excited.
I'm thinking that if we get any followers, besides who we have currently, I can't wait for like a session where they can ask us questions, and we'll give you a chance to answer first, before I eventually get it right.
Yeah.
Little friendly
Well, I'll
competition.
have the better opinion. You might be right, but I'll have the better opinion. No, I'm excited. There's some juicy stuff coming up. I'm
Well,
excited to get to season two, and I'm definitely excited once the episodes start dropping to start taking it week by week with it.
yeah, me too. I'm excited. I'm so excited that I've had a hard time. I've had a hard time keeping myself from just racing through the first book again, and keeping myself from watching the next episode of the show. I really need to focus on episode two, and I'm having a hard time maintaining that focus on that. I really just want to just keep going. It's such a good series in both formats, and it's really hard to really dig deep when all you want to do is
Hard to
keep
pace
going.
yourself.
Yeah, it is. It is. So, all right, man. Well, thanks for joining. You want to try to do something tomorrow, or we want to talk off stream about when we want to give it a shot next?
Yeah, I think we can talk off stream. We'll figure it out. We'll get kind of a schedule going. That way we can be consistent with it, and go from there.
All righty. Well, I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this off, and it was nice talking to you, man.
You too, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Yes, sir. Have a good night.
You too.
All right. Thank you guys for watching. If anybody makes it to the very, very end, uh, I don't know why you're here. Go ahead and close the stream. Go do something else. Bye.